Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Stephanie Bree, and today I'm going to be talking about my top 25 books of all time. Now, specifically, this is going to be more or less fiction novels. Uh, I wanted to leave nonfiction books off this list because that's a whole nother list, and I didn't want to flood it with like sci-fi or Star Wars because I could do a whole top 25 Star Wars books of all time, and I could do a separate top 25 sci-fi books of all time without a single Star Wars book on it. But this is an amalgamation of all fiction. So there will be some horror and there will be some sci-fi and some Star Wars. Now here's the thing. There are probably better books out there than what are going to make this list. This list is based on books I've read. If I've seen the movie but not read the book, it doesn't count. So I'll try to mention how old I was when I read the book or what I remember of it and why I like it. So we're going to start with number 25. This is a children's book. Not the only children's book on the list, but there's only like a handful. But this one stands out to me, and it's called Freckle Juice. Now, the reason why Freckle Juice appealed to me as a kid, and I read it in kindergarten, my sister, who was in second grade at the time, checked it out from the library and let me read it because she used to let me read her books. She's actually the one who taught me how to read before I even got to kindergarten. So, Freckle Juice, what appealed to me about this book was the kid was obsessed with his friend who had freckles and just wanted his own freckles. Now, you can't tell by looking at me, but I had a few freckles as a kid. They've mostly faded away over the years, but I still have a few spots on my arms, but my face is mostly cleared up. Number 24 is a book I'm fairly certain anyone who watches this video has probably read or saw the cartoon, and it's Charlotte's Web. I know I read this book in school, but I don't remember what grade it was. But I also know we watched the cartoon, and I remember reading it for fun. This was before I had developed my arachnophobia, my fear of spiders. When I was a kid, like a little kid, 4, 5, 6, I wasn't afraid of anything. My phobias developed over time, mostly due to trauma. My spider fear comes from trauma. I was bit by a spider that made my whole leg swell up this big. Now, this isn't how big the welt was. This is how much of my leg the spider bite took. It was gigantic. And it was black pus and gross and nasty. And that was when I realized spiders are motherfuckers. Number 23 is Where the Sidewalk Ends. This is, I believe, a collection of short stories and possibly poems from what I remember. I barely remember it, but I remember checking it out from the library more than once. Number 22 is one that my English teacher made me read in either 7th or 8th grade. It was one or the other, but I can't remember 100%. But I really liked it. It was called That Was Then, This Is Now. It's sort of a tie-in to The Outsiders, but it's not really a prequel or a sequel. The story in this book runs concurrent with the story in The Outsiders, but there's some overlap with the characters. So parts of it serve as a sequel, parts of it serve as a prequel. But it was a really good book. Number 21 is the only book of this sort that made the list. This is Snow White in the Enchanted Forest. This was a find your fate type, choose your own adventure book. And I don't remember which specific brand it was, but this was my gender awakening. Reading this book is in first grade, at 7 years old, is when I started to really realize I felt like a girl. Number 20 is Roots. I'm too white to talk about Roots, but I'm going to say I read it after high school because we watched the miniseries. And so I wanted to get more because I was living with a man at the time who was African American, and I wanted to understand him and his experiences better. Number 19 is Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. This is kind of a collection of short stories, mostly horror stories or ghost stories. Number 18 is the only Stephen King book to make... Well, okay, no, it's not. I take that back. One of two Stephen King books to make this list that I did not like the movie or did not watch the movie. And this is Misery. Now, if you follow my other channel, Horror Trends, I've already reviewed this movie. I hate it. I hate everything about it. Boring and not good. The book, however, is fucking terrifying. So, I read Misery in second grade. Number 17 is another ghost story that I really like. It's called Doll in the Garden. And I don't want to get into the particulars. What made me like this book was the little girl ghost. I felt connected to her. And so I was really rooting for her to get her doll. Because as a closeted trans girl, all I wanted more than anything in the world was to get my own doll. Either a Barbie or a Rainbow Bride. And I wasn't allowed to have one. Number 16 is a movie I will be upfront and honest, I'm not a fan of, but I loved the book. And I actually read the book 25 years before I watched the movie. Now, the movie came out when I was a kid, but I didn't watch it as a kid when I should have. So I have no nostalgia for the movie, but I have a tremendous amount of nostalgia and respect for the book. And this is The Neverending Story. Number 15 is another horror book, adult horror book I read in third grade. And again, I read it about 3 times as a kid. And this is the original The Amityville Horror. Now, as a kid, I thought this book was a lot scarier than what I thought the movie was when I saw it for the first time. Number 14 is, I'm going to be honest, the first book that ever made me cry. And I have a lot of reasons why I felt a kinship with the little boy in this book, even though I identified as female. But I don't want to get into that here. But I loved Bridge to Terabithia. Now, they made us watch a made-for-TV movie of Bridge to Terabithia back when I was in grade school, but it sucked. The more recent Walden Books Disney joint venture movie was fucking amazing. And it also made me cry like a little girl. Number 13 is a book I'm fairly certain most, if not all of you, have never heard of. Now, you're going to put your pinky up and go, excuse me, I've read that. It's X-Men issue number blah, blah, blah. No, it isn't. The book is called Children of the Atom, and it's by Wilmar H. Shiras. Now, it is out of print, so extremely difficult to get. In fact, the only way you can get it is to buy a reproduction, unless you want to spend a fortune on eBay. This is allegedly one of the books that inspired Stan Lee and Steve Ditko when they were creating the X-Men. Was Steve Ditko involved in the X-Men? I think he was. Anyways, Stan Lee for sure. But anyways, he tries to deny that he ever read this book. But if you've read this book, this is X-Men issue 1. It's the same fucking story. Just without Magneto. Number 12 is a book I read in 2nd grade that I'm here to tell you, as an adult, the adults in my life should have probably made sure I didn't read this book. This was Stephen King's Gerald's Game. Now, if you're familiar with Gerald's Game, this is not a book for a 2nd grader. But I read it, and boy, howdy did it raise questions. Number 11 is the first of the Star Wars books to make the list. Not the best of the Star Wars books on the list, because there are going to be at least 1 or 2 others. But this was one of my favorite Star Wars books as a kid. I love the video games. I love the toys, tie-ins. This is Shadows of the Empire. It was basically everything but a book. It was like Lucasfilm's lead up to the special editions that were going to lead up to the prequels. And I was just happy to have more Star Wars. Number 10, we're finally into the top 10. Most of these books, I would venture to say, you've read or are very familiar with. And at the very least, you've seen the movie, if they have a movie. Number 10 is Alice in Wonderland. Now, I know that's not the official title, but I never read the Through the Looking Glass part. I always stopped at Alice in Wonderland. There's reasons for that. It was one of those, I just didn't want the story to end, but I also didn't want to spoil it by going forward. Number 9 is another Star Wars book. This is the Timothy Zahn Heir to the Empire. Now, I like the whole trilogy to an extent, but this movie transcends Star Wars and is just a great goddamn book all on its own. Number 8 is a book I read at least 3 or 4 times as a kid. I can't pinpoint my earliest time reading it because I was obsessed with the movie, so I read the book a lot. This was The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Now, I read 2 or 3 other Oz books, and I also watched Return to Oz and the animated cartoon from that period. So I was obsessed with The Wizard of Oz. Hey, I grew up in Kansas. What do you expect? Number 17 is Stephen King's It. Now, I'm going to tell you, It is a book that I read as an adult. In fact, I didn't read it for the first time until I was in college. I had already seen the miniseries multiple times. The Bill Skarsgård It Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 hadn't come out yet, but they were already talking about them. It was in the works. So I wanted to read the book before it came out so I could have a better understanding of the comparisons of the 3 different versions of this story. I love the book, but I'm going to be honest, there's the thing in it, you know what it is if you've read it, I don't have to tell you, that makes me uncomfortable. That being said, I still love that book. It scared the shit out of me. Number 6 is a movie I watched as a teenager. I was probably 16 or 17 when I watched the movie, and I went to the bookstore and immediately bought the novel and read it the next day. This is Michael Crichton's Sphere. I could not wait to read this book after I watched that movie because I knew the book was going to be better than the movie. Number 5 is another Stephen King book. I read this one when I was in 3rd grade, which I'm here to tell you this is not a book for 3rd graders, just like Gerald's Game is not a book for 2nd graders. This is Pet Sematary. Now, neither of the movies are as scary as the book, but this particular book is 110% the scariest fucking book I've ever read, and the last horror book on this list. Number 4 is another Michael Crichton slog, but I read it before I saw the movie, even though I was in like maybe 3rd or 4th grade when the movie came out. I read the book and it was a chore, but I forced myself to finish it before I saw the movie, and this was Jurassic Park. Now I cheated. I also got the Scholastic picture book, which I flipped through while I was reading this, just so I could like picture what was going on, because that was a dense book for a 4th grader, 3rd or 4th grade, maybe 5th grade. I can't remember. No, it was 3rd or 4th, because it was 93. Anyways, 1 second. Fucking cigars went out. We're down to the top 3. Now, 2 of these are books I read in school. One of these, I'm just going to tell you, is a Star Wars. So number 3 is the only other book I've ever read to make me cry. And this was To Kill a Mockingbird. I'm not going to get into it. I'm just going to say it's number 3, and let's move on. Number 2 is Star Wars From the Adventures of Luke Skywalker, which is the novelization of the 1977 original film, later rebranded as A New Hope. I read this so many times as a kid. I've read it so many times as an adult. This is the book I've read the second most out of any other book. I've probably, grand total, read this book about complete, all the way through, start to finish, maybe 15 to 20 times in my life. Number 1, I've read at least 3, maybe 4 times as many as that. There was a time where I would read it once a year. Couple of years I read it twice, and the first time I read it 3 times back to back. I read it a lot. This is A Wrinkle in Time. Now, although this is my absolute favorite book of all time, I have never seen a film or television adaptation of this book that was worth a shit. They all suck. Various degrees. They get some things right better than the others, but some things wrong worse than the others. And it's just like they just can't fucking nail it, which I don't understand, because it's not an incredibly complex book. Anyways, that's my top 25 greatest fiction books of all time. Stay cool.